Hi, I'm Danielle Karen, and in this podcast, I'm going to share with you knowledge and tools that I believe should be accessible to everyone. They're fundamental and essential to being human. Embody Your Power is an integrative model that bridges science, spirituality, and ancient wisdom to give you the resources needed to live your fullest potential. As a psychotherapist for over 16 years and now as a coach, I help people know, reclaim, and embody their power on all levels. It's my mission to help you connect to your unshakable resilience, to know true power and freedom, to be sovereign, and to remember your divine nature. If you're wanting to learn tools to release layers of conditioning, heal from trauma, feel at home in your body, have inner peace, expand your capacity for joy, connect spiritually, and take a journey with me to embody your power, then this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining me. Together, let's raise our consciousness to help evolve humanity. Do you know how to access your greatest power? In this episode, we'll explore the most powerful aspect of ourselves, our core self. It's the true essence of who we are, and it's our greatest resource. Our core self is where our power resides. Knowing that our core self exists and knowing how to access it is essential to embodying our power. Our access to our core self exists on a continuum, meaning some of us don't know it exists at all. We can feel disconnected from it. We can spontaneously experience it. We can dip our toe in and feel the surface. We can have a practice where we're intentionally connecting with our core self. Or we can jump in fully and explore the infinite depths of it. I used to not know that it existed at all, and now, depending on the day and situation, I experience various degrees of access to my core self. Our understanding of the core self also exists on a continuum, given its infinite nature. Therefore, I'll be sharing my current understanding of it, which will continue to evolve. Some of what I share in this podcast may or may not resonate with you. I encourage you to check in with yourself to feel what aligns with you and what doesn't. Take what resonates with you and leave the rest. With information in my podcast or anywhere else, it's important to always regard your own knowing, feeling, and intuition above others. A famous quote by Buddha is, "Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense." You know yourself the best. When we're accessing our core self, we access our knowing. If you have parts that don't trust you, they might disregard your inner knowing for what others are saying or doing. Our goal is to build trust with the parts of our psyche and to have our core self in the driver's seat, driving the path of our lives as much as possible. I'd like to ask you a few questions. When do you feel most like yourself? When do you feel aligned with the truth about yourself? When we are embodying our core self, we're aligned with the truth about ourselves and we feel most like ourselves. What I'm calling our core self may also be referred to as your true self, self with a capital S, as Richard Schwartz refers to it, higher self, essential self, your essence, inner light, spirit, soul, consciousness, awareness, or your inner being. I like using the term core self with clients because I think it facilitates the work we're doing and is a concept most people can connect with. Consciousness or awareness are likely better names for this innate aspect of who we are. I like to draw out and map our psyche to give people a tangible way of looking at what's happening and where we want to get to. I draw a sun in the center of the page to represent our core self because I believe it's always present and always shining. Although I had many experiences of accessing my core self throughout my life, I wasn't able to utilize this innate power until I learned about it from Richard Schwartz, also known as Dick Schwartz, developer of internal family systems, or IFS for short. I'm forever grateful to Dick Schwartz for bringing his work to the world in such a unique way, with such clarity, and in a way that really resonates with me. I believe there are many names for the same thing, and there are many people talking about the same concepts, yet we gravitate to those who communicate in a way that resonates with us. I find the language and concepts very universal and easy to relate to for most people. Dick Schwartz found a way to help people access something powerful inside of them, which is a true gift. Other people talk and teach about the core self, but it's rare when somebody lays out a simple and tangible way to experience it. For example, I studied contemplative psychotherapy at Europa University, and because we were learning about Buddhist psychology, we talked a lot about Buddha nature. Buddha nature can be defined as the fundamental nature of all being, and the essence of who we are. It is the essential nature of the mind, completely present, yet obscured by delusions. Some also describe it as luminous mind that is always present whether we are aware of it or not. We could use the same definitions to describe the core self. I understood intellectually the beautiful concept of Buddha nature. It was portrayed as our true essence and that it exists in everyone, but it remained obscure on how to access it. Richard Schwartz gave me the gift of knowing my true essence and a tangible way to access it. Before that, I didn't have a name for the core self experiences I was already having. I didn't know the core self was my true essence and spiritual self. I didn't know how I can intentionally access it. I didn't know my core self could help me when I'm struggling. I didn't realize its connection to source. Nor did I know how expansive, profound, and powerful it really is. Through my experiences with meditation and somatic experiencing during my years at Europa, I'm grateful to have graduated with a very calm mind and nervous system. Meditation and somatic practices led to many moments of no active parts, which were experienced as a calm, quiet presence, peace, joy, and clarity. I didn't have an understanding of my core self at that time. I was experiencing qualities of my core self, but without the context and understanding of my core self, I wasn't able to make the most use of those incredible experiences. Before learning how to access my core self, I was living mostly in the realm of my psyche's protective parts. When I would meditate, I would experience a calm body and quiet mind. But I didn't associate this with this powerful aspect of me. I saw it more as a success that I was able to get a break from my mind. Before I learned about my core self, my psyche felt like an elusive thing. And when parts of my psyche got activated, I would feel overwhelmed by their feelings, and I didn't know how to separate from them. I didn't even know that separating from them was an option. So when my parts were triggered, they were flooding through with painful emotions, or fearful parts kicked in to try to manage the emotions, sometimes before the emotion could even be felt. My parts were alone and panicking. I didn't know how to help them. When I learned to separate from my parts, they would feel supported and nourished by my core self, which was a huge shift. Like a loving, present parent holding their child when they're in pain. In this analogy, imagine how a child would feel when they're in pain and there is no parent around. This is how we might feel when we don't know how to access our core self. So it was profound to feel more in control of my mind and less at the mercy of it. Now, the feelings of my parts were much more manageable, and I had a way to work with them on my own. This was empowering. Being introduced to the concept of the core self changed my life. Many clients that I work with can relate to the concept of the core self, but haven't had someone show them how to intentionally access it. Others may not know that it exists at all, and that's okay. Through our work together, they will discover this powerful resource within. In my Embody Your Power model, the core self is at the core of it, meaning it's the center we work from. Why? It's our greatest power and resource. It's the truest essence of who we are. It's our conscious self. It's embodied source. The greatest change, transformation, and growth happens when we're accessing our core self. In my work, it's my priority to help someone connect to this innate power within them first before we do anything else. Why? I want to help them establish a connection to this innate power so that they can do the work from this place. Trying to do the work without a connection to the core self, for me, is like teaching someone to drive without them ever being in a car. When we're not embodying our core self, we're lost in the world of the parts of our psyche. When we work from the core self, we can experience change and transformation in a short amount of time. Often, people feel the power of this work in the first session. However, most therapeutic trainings and modalities don't make the distinction between our core self and the parts of our psyche. This is problematic. Why? When therapists don't know that there's a core self and that it's separate from the parts of our psyche, they learn how to help others by eliciting more parts to manage and regulate the pain and fear which drives someone further away from accessing their core self. Now we're caught in the world of the parts, which we can't create change from. When no one is guiding us to have our core self be with these parts, we can become dependent on our therapist's core self. Then we need to ask, is our therapist accessing their core self? And if our therapist isn't embodying their core self, then we're all lost. This is why so many people come to me looking for something different and say talk therapy didn't work. We need to discern which part is talking at any given time, otherwise we can get lost in all the parts of our psyche. The first way that many people get introduced to what the core self is, including myself, is through the 8 words that start with the letter C used to describe the qualities of the core self. Dick Schwartz saw these qualities were consistently showing up in people when they access their core self. The C words include compassion, curiosity, calm, clarity, courage, confidence, connectedness, and creativity. These adjectives can be a helpful reference point in the beginning for people to know if they're accessing their core self. When I first learned about this work, I put a lot of emphasis on these words to understand the nature of the core self. As I continue to seek to understand the vastness of the core self, I experience it also as presence, consciousness, awareness, and embodied source. One way we can start to distinguish our core self from our protector parts is that the core self doesn't have an agenda. All of our protector parts have an agenda and are afraid if they didn't do something that we would get hurt or be overwhelmed by pain. Remember, the core self is fearless in the face of the fear and pain of our parts. And when it's not afraid of the pain, it doesn't have a reason to jump in and try to fix, stop, or avoid the pain. It's not going to take over and try to rescue us. Our core self is always present like the sun, but that doesn't mean we're always able to access it. So for the most part, we have to intentionally work to connect with it. It's available for us when we know how and want to connect with it. Another way that we know that we're accessing our core self is when we're able to hold a much bigger perspective than the parts of our psyche. The parts are operating from a limited tunnel vision perspective. Our core self always has a much bigger perspective. This bigger perspective can bring great peace, calm, and clarity. We are embodied source and a unique expression of it. It's possible that we might have a hard time really knowing how big of a perspective the core self really holds. Perhaps it's connected to a perspective on this world, reality, and life that we can't wrap our minds around. It's like a child that's consumed by the pain of someone bullying them. All that they can focus on in that moment is the pain they feel. Maybe they feel bad about themselves and feel like it's their fault. When we separate from our parts, we will see the whole situation from a bigger perspective. It's zooming out from being so focused in on something. The core self is like the parent that can see the child going through this experience from a bigger perspective. It can have compassion for their child and understand why the child is upset, validate their pain, and the parent also knows that it isn't the end of the world and their child is going to be okay and will be having fun and enjoying life again soon. The parent knows the child isn't a bad person, it wasn't their fault, and they are loved and supported even though the child may not be able to feel that in the moment. When the core self holds this bigger perspective but doesn't discount the part's feelings, then it can be very comforting and healing to our parts. When I ask my clients the question, who are you in this present moment when you separate from all your parts? I may follow that up with asking, how do things look different from your core self? Do you have a different perspective than that part? All parts desire to connect with our core self and to have the core self in the driver's seat, even though at first we may find a part saying that it doesn't want these things. We may need to build trust with the part before it's ready to receive the nourishment the core self has to offer, and to allow the core self to be in the driver's seat. Whenever we're in the present moment, meaning we're not operating from our parts or the past or future, we're embodying our core self. Can you think of a time when you were in the present moment and you felt some of the qualities of your core self? Although I had been studying internal family systems since 2013, it wasn't until I met Dick Schwartz in 2016 at a level 2 training called IFS, Trauma, and Neuroscience that I began understanding the depth of the core self and its unshakable resilience. While witnessing Dick work with others, I got a transmission on the fearless nature of the core self, meaning the core self is not afraid to be with any of our parts' fear or pain. When I watched Dick display an unwavering knowing that everyone has a core self and confidence that the core self can be with any part no matter how much pain it was in or how fearful it is, it awakened something inside of me. I knew this to be true. From that time on, I held an unwavering trust that the core self is present in everyone and that it can be with any of their parts. I started to place a demand on it to come forward with my clients, and it did. Since I was introduced to the concept of the core self by Dick Schwartz, I wanted to know how to access greater depths of it. I knew it was profound, and I was curious to know more. In 2017, I studied again with Dick Schwartz in Italy, and this time for a retreat he held on IFS and spirituality. I gained a much deeper understanding about the connection between our core self and source. From what I learned from Dick Schwartz, in addition to my own exploration and experiences, I believe our core self is a deeply spiritual aspect of us. It is consciousness. It's knowing. It's present. It's regulated. It exists in the silence and stillness. It doesn't need to run around and save us, take care of things, or sort things out. It doesn't have an agenda. Our core self supports our health and well-being on all levels. It's whole and cannot be broken or damaged. We are all unique expressions of the divine. Dick Schwartz describes this innate state beautifully in this quote where he refers to the core self as the divine within. Though they use different words, all the esoteric traditions within the major religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, emphasize their same core belief. We are all sparks of the eternal flame, manifestations of the absolute ground of being. It turns out that the divine within, what the Christians call the soul or Christ consciousness, Buddhists call Buddha nature, the Hindus Atman, the Taoists Tao, the Sufis the beloved, the Quakers the inner light, often doesn't take years of meditative practice to access because it exists in all of us, just below the surface of our extreme parts. Once they agree to separate from us, we suddenly have access to who we really are. Our consciousness, our core self, uses our mind and body to interact with this reality. We are not our mind or our body, just like we are not our parts. We can suffer when we start to identify as our parts, the mind or the body as who we are. Instead, I see them as the vehicle that we drive around in. We are infinite consciousness looking into and experiencing this world through our mind and body. The core self is always present. However, the parts of our psyche can cloud it out or make us feel disconnected from it. It's the mind that can keep us from really knowing the divine within. If our mind and body are the vehicle for our consciousness to experience this reality, it's important to know how they operate and how to take good care of them. This is one of my intentions of this podcast. Next, let's take an integrative look at how our core self impacts us. Physically, we are most protected when we're embodying our core self, when our whole body is filled up with this energy. Perhaps you might notice some physical sensations when you're embodying your core self. Physiologically, we're calm and regulated in our nervous system when we're connected to our core self. Psychologically, we're present and not focused on the past or future. Our parts aren't taking us over. We have a quiet mind. This is when we can have great clarity and knowing. Emotionally, we're resilient and not being driven around by our fear or pain. When we're embodying our core self, we can access higher vibrational emotions such as happiness, joy, pleasure, ecstasy, gratitude, peace, and the profound feelings that come with connecting to Source. Relationally, when we do this work, we create secure internal attachment between our core self and our parts, which allows us to create healthier relationships with others. We have greater internal peace and harmony within ourselves. We bring more presence to our relationships. In the previous episode, Tips for Navigating Relationships, I shared the significance of relating to others from our core self and how this is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and others. Relationships truly thrive when we're accessing our core self. Spiritually, we are a unique expression of infinite consciousness. Our core self is embodied Source, and Source is in us and all around us. Locke Kelly was co-leading the training with Dick Schwartz in Italy and teaching his profound awake awareness techniques. I was able to experience the awareness that's in the space in us and all around us. Locke guided us to connect with the infinite space, which many would say is just empty. He was teaching that it's not empty, it's awake and aware. He taught us a powerful meditation that guided us to turn our awareness around. As humans, we're often directing our awareness outward, out at the world, with what we can see and observe. But in this meditation, we experienced awareness being aware of us. This was a totally new and incredible way of connecting with Source. My experience of it was feeling plugged into an infinite loving presence, and there was no separation. Locke shares, the clouds that obscure our already awake loving nature often take the form of hurt parts of us that are all trying to find safety and love. Now let's look at different ways to connect to our core self. My favorite way of helping my clients access their core self is to help them identify and get an image of the protector or exile part that they want to work with. Pause the part, and then have them ask themselves, who am I in this present moment when I separate from this part? Sometimes a few other parts need to step back before we can access our core self. Once someone is connected to their core self, I have them take time to embody it, to really feel the qualities that are present. It's incredible to witness clients access their core self, this innate power within. Then, when they bring their core self to their parts, it's amazing to see the parts transform in their presence. Many people experience immense gratitude upon shifting into a more compassionate relationship with themselves. Their body relaxes as their core self is present, and the parts trust it to take care of things. So when we notice a part of our psyche that's operating from fear or pain is present, then we can actively work to separate from it. We can find out if our core self or another part is present when we ask the question, how do you feel toward the part? If you're judging it, angry at it, don't like it, want to fix it or make it go away, then it's another part that just jumped in. If you feel open and curious to get to know the part, then you're accessing your core self qualities. When we're able to separate from our parts, then we can experience our true essence. When some people access their core self for the first time, they might experience a feeling of emptiness. That's okay. We can take time to be curious with the feeling of emptiness and with time discover and experience our true nature. Sometimes after describing the core self, I may ask somebody to recall a time that they've experienced it and to draw up that memory. From there, we can work to feel and embody it in this present moment. When we're in the present moment, we're often embodying our core self. What helps you drop into the present moment? These things can be helpful ways for you to access your core self. When you're going about your day, you may start to notice when you're in the present moment and experiencing some of the qualities of the C words. You can try a prompt from Loch Kelly. What's here now when there's no problem to solve? Our protectors are trying to manage things and solve problems, so this prompt can help us separate from them and access our core self. Through meditation, we can experience our core self when we still or quiet our mind. Our core self exists in the silence and stillness, and so meditation practices are very helpful at connecting with and experiencing our innate state. The Yoga Sutra by Patanjali gives advice on how to remember that our nature is consciousness in this quote. Remembrance of consciousness occurs only when the mind becomes still. If we can still the mind, then we will rest in our true form, which is the one who truly sees. If we cannot still the mind, we will think that we are the mind and we will suffer. I've really enjoyed Joe Dispenza's work and meditations as a way of connecting to my core self and source. The way that he describes the void, the place he guides people to in the meditations, is exactly the way I would describe a powerful near-death experience that I had. He guides people to become pure consciousness by becoming no one, no thing, no time, and no place. From my personal experience, I prefer to think of it as knowing myself beyond my body, meaning I'm experiencing more of who I am instead of focusing on becoming no one. His meditations guide people to experience themselves as pure consciousness in the void, also known as the quantum field. He brings our awareness to the space that's in us and the infinite space all around us. Doing so helps shift us into the state of consciousness of our core self when we focus on space. Bringing our attention to the space is also an antidote to our parts that are in pain or fear that want to focus in on something. Prayer is also a way that we can access our core self and source. One of my dear clients recently shared with me a powerful experience she had when she was in deep prayer at her church. She was praying for God to remove a particular burden from her that she struggled with all of her life. She had an experience that she had never had before. She is filled with an incredible amount of core self and source energy that she experienced herself beyond her body for what felt like an eternity. This state of experiencing ourselves beyond our body can put us directly in touch with our true nature of pure consciousness. It was deeply emotional and moving for her. Afterwards, she was relieved of the burden that consumed her. When we access a tremendous amount of core self and source energy, burdens can instantly and spontaneously be healed in its presence. Another way that people access their core self is through the use of psychedelics. Dick Schwartz believes some substances have the power to separate us from all our parts, allowing us to access a tremendous amount of core self energy, which can be very healing to our parts and burdens. It's not a field that I have training in. However, it is growing and more research is becoming available. Personally, my most powerful experience of my core self and source came through a near-death experience when I was 19. I experienced myself beyond my body and knew that death was not the end. I promise to dive into that more in another episode. Near-death experiences are often spiritual and life-changing. Some people have shared with me that taking psychedelics simulated a near-death experience for them and transform them profoundly. I continue to be curious about the depth of the core self and what's possible when we access it. I've been experimenting with creating meditations that integrate many aspects of what's been helpful to me along my journey to deepen the experience. Stay tuned for next week's episode where I'll guide you through a meditation to assist you in connecting to your core self. At the end of this episode, I offer some ways to get to know your core self. Explore when you feel most like yourself or most aligned with the truth about yourself. Take an inventory of what helps you to be present. Begin noticing when you're accessing one of the C words: compassion, curiosity, calm, clarity, courage, confidence, connectedness, or creativity. Start to notice when your core self is present and when the parts are taking over. Use a prompt such as, "Who am I in this present moment when all of my parts separate from me?" Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please consider assisting me in reaching more people by sharing it with others or writing a review. Together, let's raise our consciousness to help evolve humanity. For more information, please visit my website, daniellecaron.com. That's DANIELLECARRON.com.